Welcome back to the Money Mile Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Waller, and I'm happy you are here. We like to think of Money Mile as standing at the corner of triathlon and personal finance. We believe that age group triathletes are the lifeblood of our sport, and we want to shine the light on some good people doing great things in our sport. Today, we are joined again by Beaker McKee. But we are going to mix things up a bit today. We are going to do our questions on course segment first, and then you will hear our interview with Beaker. Beaker is so much fun to talk with, and I will tell you that the interview is probably going to be a little bit on the longer side, but hopefully fun until the end, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. A question that I have received frequently as of late is, should I consider Social Security in my planning? For those of you that are not aware, Social Security is a system for U.S. residents and wage earners in the U.S. that operates somewhat behind the scenes. We pay into it throughout our working career. As an employee, we pay part, as our employers will pay part of that. But it is a system that essentially operates behind the scenes, and then at some future date, the Social Security Administration says they are going to pay you a certain amount. If you are curious, you can go to ssa.gov. To the website is ssa.gov. You can check your earnings history there, make sure everything's accurate, and get an idea of what your estimates are. To be clear, when I think about Social Security, I think of two things. Essentially, the Social Security system is designed to give you a monthly income stream for the rest of your life, which operates very similar to an insurance annuity payout system that you would receive for the rest of your life, or an old school pension, if you might be familiar with those sorts of things. The other piece of this is that we are also dealing with a government system. As we all know, some government systems are fantastic and some leave some room for improvement. Essentially, what we are talking about here with Social Security, in my view, is a government-run insurance program. Typically, two individual things I'm not a huge fan of, and you put them together, I am also not a huge fan of that. In general, I would recommend that you keep in mind there are likely going to be some changes with this system in the near or long term. So it's not an ironclad guarantee that it's always going to be exactly what it says, and there are likely going to be some changes. So one of the reasons why I think there are going to be changes is highlighted by your Social Security statement. So if you log into ssa.gov and pull up your Social Security statement, one of the things that you'll see there, and they've kind of pushed it down on this statement. I looked at my statement here, and if I look at page 4, there is a section on there that says Social Security will be there when you retire. Now, on my form, it says, and I'll quote here, the Social Security Board of Trustees estimates that based on current law, the trust funds will be able to pay benefits in full and on time until 2034. In 2034, Social Security would still be able to pay about $800 for every $1,000 of benefits scheduled. End quote. That essentially tells me that on the current path, and I'm recording this in October of 2024, on the current path, the Social Security Administration should be able to have enough money to pay all their bills for the next decade. After that, they'll be able to pay about 80 cents on the dollar for future claims. I would anticipate fully that something is going to change here. I don't think the politicians will let Social Security fail, but that being said, I think we should be aware of some potential changes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So a good rule of thumb, in my opinion, to start with is that if you are under age 55 in 2024, I wouldn't overly rely on Social Security in its current form. At some point, if you're further down the road, maybe you're already receiving Social Security, I think you're probably pretty safe. But again, I would anticipate that there are going to be some changes down the road. There are a few things you need to be aware of with Social Security. There are several different benefits as a starting point. The first of which is your primary retirement benefit. There is lots of talk out there about delaying Social Security and trying to take it as late as you can, which is generally a fine idea. And the reason being is that the longer you wait, there's a guaranteed increase in your Social Security payment. That is all well and good. I like guaranteed income streams of higher amounts as much as the next guy. The big question here is longevity. So as I often comment, I had a client years ago who had said he was, as a male in his family, no male had ever reached the age of 70, and he was not planning on being the first. So if you find yourself in that situation, taking your Social Security early might not be a bad deal. However, with the marvels of modern medicine and extended life expectancy, I would anticipate that most of us are going to be living a little bit longer in this generation than the generation prior. So when we're thinking about receiving those benefits for longer periods of time, that's where the longevity question comes in, and when is it better for you? Unfortunately, going into that decision-making process, if you're in your late 50s or early 60s trying to figure it out, there is a right time to claim Social Security. Unfortunately, you won't know what that is until a decade or so after you've claimed it. If you have this conversation or if you're reviewing your benefits around your 84th birthday, chances are you'll have a pretty good idea of when you should have started claiming benefits. It's just hard to know going into it. So there's some unknowns there. I have some general guidelines when we're talking about your primary retirement benefit. And ultimately, a lot of it comes down to the point that the money has got to come from somewhere. So if you are dead set going to stop working at 65, the money has to come from somewhere for you to keep food on your table, to keep the light bills paid, and for you to travel or do whatever you want to do. So if you have a bunch of money elsewhere that you can utilize and you have the capacity to delay your Social Security payments, then great. Typically, Social Security eligibility starts at age 62, and the longest that you can defer it is age 70. So that kind of gives you the range in which you're dealing with. But again, that money has got to come from somewhere. My suggestions here are to consider delaying it until you're going to use it as the first piece. So if you are actively working, don't claim your Social Security until you're actually going to use that Social Security income. There's some messy stuff that goes on with that if you're taking your Social Security before your full retirement age. They'll still let you do it, but it gets messy. So if you're not going to use it, don't claim it. The second piece that I want you to be aware of involves some of the other benefits which we're going to talk about. The spousal benefit is an important component of Social Security planning for married couples. Spousal benefits are something that show up on the fourth page of your Social Security statement as in a relatively small blurb. But I'll paint the example that if you have a husband and wife, and let's say the wife is the primary breadwinner for the home, and the husband has been a stay-at-home husband his entire adulthood, and therefore has not earned his own credits. As a spouse, he is eligible to receive a spousal benefit related to his wife's Social Security earnings history. Now, I know this can get a little bit confusing, a little convoluted. So essentially the way that it works is when the claiming spouse has reached their full retirement age, the spouse is then eligible for 1/2 of the full retirement benefit of the primary wage earning spouse. Now, if the primary wage earner isn't claiming Social Security, it doesn't really have an impact there. You have to wait until the primary breadwinner or the primary wage earner has started claiming. There is a benefit of 1/2 of the primary wage earner's benefit at full retirement age. That is for the spouse. So in theory, one spouse could get $3,000, or the primary wage earning spouse could have a benefit of $3,000, and then the spousal benefit would be $1,500. So in total, between the two of them, they would get $4,500. So the spousal benefit is an important piece to consider when you're looking at claiming strategies. It is all still based on the full retirement age benefit, and there are some different nuances there of taking funds early and when things can happen. So I highly recommend you do a deep dive or sit down with your Social Security representative to get some additional information there. The next piece in the decision-making process for me is the survivorship benefit. The survivorship benefit is when one of those two spouses passes away. The surviving spouse has the capacity, and as I understand it, it's actually the choice, to opt for either of the Social Security benefits. If the primary breadwinning spouse or primary earning spouse had earned $3,000 a month and the spousal benefit was $1,500, the surviving spouse can then choose which of those two benefits they would like to take. Now, I have not heard of anyone effectively selecting the lower amount, because I don't know that somebody would do that if they knew what they were doing. But typically, it means that you don't get both, that you could just choose the larger of those two benefits. So delaying benefits specifically for the survivorship benefit and trying to grow that survivorship benefit for the surviving spouse is also something to consider. So lots of nuanced pieces there, but hopefully I explained all that clearly. And again, this is really around the primary wage earner and their claiming strategies. There are lots of other things that go on with Social Security, and we're really just touching at the high-level pieces to hopefully whet your appetite and get you interested in exploring some options. And again, I would highly recommend you talk with your Social Security representative. There are a couple of other things that you do need to be aware of, one of which is that Social Security benefits can be taxed, and I would say that for most of my clients, Social Security benefits are taxed at some level. If your income reaches, or if your income is below a certain threshold, then your Social Security is paid to you income tax free. That level is relatively low. So for most of my clients that have meaningful resources elsewhere and have done a good job of saving and accumulating, they are going to be paying taxes on their Social Security at some level. The question is how much of their Social Security is going to be included in their taxable income. That amount starts at 50% of your Social Security, and as it goes up, it's capped at 85% of your Social Security is included in your taxable income. At least, again, based on current guidelines, that is the rule around Social Security. I mentioned before that there are likely going to be changes within the Social Security system. A couple of those changes that I would like for you to be aware of as potentials, and again, nothing is written in stone at this point. There are two primary changes that I believe are things that you should be considering. The first of which is an increase in wage-based limits and maximum contributions into the system. What this means is that if you are a wage earner or you earn money in the U.S. system, it means that the first $168,600 in 2024 is included in the Social Security calculation. So if you earn an extra $100,000 over and above that, you're not going to pay Social Security tax on that amount above the $168,000 number. This is one of the likely areas that I would anticipate there to be some change down the road, that it does adjust with inflation periodically, but I would anticipate that one of the common ways that gets discussed to fix Social Security is to either increase that cap significantly or remove it entirely. And essentially that means that anyone who's making more than $170,000 is going to be contributing more into that Social Security system. The other change that is perhaps a little bit more concerning for the folks that I talk with is the impact of some degree of means testing. And what that means, for lack of a better term, is that if you have done well and accumulated resources on your own, that your Social Security is going to be offset to some extent. Now, we don't know that any of these changes are going to be made or when they're going to be made. We just know that the system right now is set up to not be able to pay all its bills in another decade. So if the means testing comes to pass, that simply means that if you have accumulated your own resources and have your own retirement savings, that you shouldn't rely on Social Security because they could essentially decrease or offset the amount of Social Security that you receive. Now, Social Security is already a very complex and convoluted system. I'm not exactly sure how they would do something like that, but they have proven that they can do it. There are other offset provisions already baked into Social Security, depending upon your benefit structure. Some of them might apply to you and some of them don't. In particular, they have to do with governmental pension offsets and looking at the windfall and elimination period or the names of the two programs. And depending upon your overall financial situation, those things may or may not apply. But the system has proven that they can bake those things in. So moving forward, my general recommendation is that if you are looking at your financial situation and you know that you need to replace $10,000 a month of lifestyle expense, and that's what you want to be able to work towards, I would suggest that you work towards replacing $10,000 a month. If Social Security kicks in and there are resources available there for you, then wonderful. That can be a little bit of extra travel money or a little bit of extra fun, but I wouldn't want you to be reliant upon a government-run insurance program to provide for the food, clothing, and shelter for you and your loved ones. That's my 2 cents. I do still run the calculations for Social Security for many of my clients and help them understand what that looks like. If it shows up, many clients will just say, well, hey, what does it look like if we just include half of the Social Security income, which is fine. And we can certainly do all the projections and calculations on that sort of thing. I don't want you to be in a situation where you are relying on that government-run insurance program if we can avoid it. Now, we have covered a lot about Social Security, and we have only really scratched the surface. There is a lot more information out there, and if Social Security is an important and meaningful part of your plan for financial independence, I highly recommend that you seek additional guidance and additional support from either your friendly local financial planner or reach out to your local Social Security Administration office and sit down with one of the representatives there and chat with them. Lots of information in there. So with that, I'd like to wrap up the questions on course segment of our conversation for today and bring on our interview with Beaker McKee. This is Beaker's second time on the show. In the previous episodes, she shared a lot about the collaborative environment around women's triathlon, and we really appreciate that. Now she is returning from Nice, France, after competing in the Ironman World Championships, finishing 12th in her age group. She is also gearing up for Ironman Arizona, just weeks away. And amidst all of this training and racing, she had a major surgery, which we'll discuss later in the show. So, Beaker, welcome back to Money Mile.
Justin, thanks for having me again.
So as a reminder, if we're doing this correctly, our listeners are out there on their long, steady run somewhere. So if we come up with any topics that have particular reference points, show notes, we'll have any links that we talk about, anything like that. And then otherwise, I will also mention that we are continuing to do our questions on course segment as well. So look forward to that in the future. So let's talk about Nice. Tell us about how everything went for you in the lead up for the race.
Well, we had been in France earlier in the year, as you well know, because as we discussed, the last time I was on the show, after the show, I contacted you. I was like, Justin, help me get my husband to retire. Please prove to us that we can retire. And so he retired the beginning of June, and we headed to France for almost a month to chase the Tour de France and spent a lot of time out there climbing mountains and taking on big climbs. And that, I think, was very key in helping me get ready for Nice, obviously, because there was over 8,000 feet of climbing on that course. And we came back, hit the ground running when we came back to Alaska, headed to Oregon. But I did not do a lot of running on that trip. And so my run was a little bit lacking. I ended up finishing second at 70.3 Oregon and headed home, directed a race in Alaska, then headed to Hawaii to train for Nice. And we got COVID. Just like, we're so careful. And so that took me down for about 10 days. And then, of course, trying to ramp back up and get back in shape. So I felt a little bit behind on my training going into Nice. And that always kind of messes with your confidence a little bit as well. And the other thing is we had been training in Hawaii where we were told, and we understood that the temperatures and conditions were comparable, but it was very cold in Nice, actually. And so once we got there and got over the jet lag, the anxiety of not having a lot of running behind me was setting in, and then the cold. And they ended up making the race wetsuit legal. And when we got there, the water was not wetsuit legal. It was very warm. And so it's kind of crazy to think in 7 days, the water went from being wetsuit legal to not being wetsuit legal.
Well, I'm glad you were prepared for that change. So you had all of your gear with you. It wasn't one of those, I'm hoping it wasn't one of those last minute, we got to go out and buy a new wetsuit 7 days before a race.
No, I am way too experienced and been in this sport way too long that we packed the entire closet. I mean, I had wetsuit, swim skin, cold weather gear, hot weather gear. It's sad how much gear a triathlete has to carry with them all over the world.
Well, being prepared for all those different scenarios, obviously, your experience, it brings a lot to the table there, and we'll have to, add that to the mental checklist for everybody else doing races. Like, regardless of what it says on the agenda or what they're telling you now, things can change. So be prepared. That's good information for us moving forward. And I understand that you also had some other crazy aspects in your year for preparation. You had a major surgery. You had lots of things going on. Could you tell us a little bit more about that side of things?
Yeah. So after Ironman Arizona in 2023, which is where I qualified for Nice by winning my age group there, I, in December, had a full hysterectomy and I wish I could actually pronounce what the wording is when you have your ovaries included, but I had the full meal deal. They took the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, my cervix, the uterus, all of it. So it was a full hysterectomy, and it was hard. It was a hard procedure to go through, and I had a lot of people that were like, "It's the best thing you're ever going to do," and all these things, and it wasn't any of those things. The biggest part for me was whether or not I was going to have my ovaries removed, and I made the decision almost last minute. And I say that, but I think I inherently knew and had been being told for some time that I needed to have my ovaries removed as well. But I hadn't really bought into that. Maybe I was still in denial on that level. I know that being a menopause specialist and being somebody that works with women in menopause every single day, we work with perimenopause, menopausal women, whether it's surgical menopause or, the natural process. I have, lots and lots of experience in it, but to actually make the decision, and I made it kind of last minute, it was basically 5 days before the surgery. I was like, fine, I'm going to do this. And all the doctors I had seen, I'd had second opinion, third opinions, everybody was telling me that probably needed to happen due to my medical history, adenocarcinoma of the cervix. I had a great aunt who died of ovarian cancer. All of the women on my mother's side have had some type of reproductive cancers. And so all the signs were leading to, you probably should just have one surgery instead of having to come back and do this again later. But I wasn't prepared for it. And even though I know all these things and, I help all these women day in and day out, waking up basically the next day and being in menopause, it was like going through a windshield from 60 miles an hour to zero. I mean, it was instantly different. Everything in my life was just different in an instant. There was no, hormones slowly dying off and leaving your body kind of thing. It was mentally and physically traumatic.
I really appreciate you being willing to openly share and openly discuss your individual experience in going through this. I know this is not something that's necessarily talked about by a lot of folks, so I very much appreciate you being willing to do this. So thank you for having this discussion with us today.
Well, I think it's super important. And I think that there's not a lot of people talking about it out there. And I think the hardest part about all of this is that when you try to go out and find information and get help with it or seek care, you either get told, this is a natural thing, live with it and you'll get over it, or you get told, buy this thing. Like, I can't tell you how many people target me, even in my vulnerable state, and I know better. This is going to change everything about menopause for you. And you're like starry-eyed. You're like, this is it. This is for the $75.99, And I think it's terrible. I think it's terrible that our society preys on us when we're in this very vulnerable state, and our doctors, unfortunately, they're getting better, but they're not out there trying to find solutions. It's hard, right? And every woman's different, and hormones are hard to figure out. Yeah. So I think it's a good topic to have. In regards to me and my training and trying to come back from it, it was not easy. Nothing was easy. First off, I'm a triathlete, and I'm an elite triathlete, and I'm an addicted triathlete. I'm addicted to, exercise. I need it for my mental health as well as my physical health. And, I was told I'm going to be down for 8 weeks. Then I was told, you're in such good shape, you only need to be down for 6 weeks. And I look back at that and I think, I really wish there was more information given to me about what that meant and what was going on and really what was just going on with my body. Right. And even though, like I said, I have all this experience, until you walk that, that cliche, you walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Right. I ran at 6 weeks and it was really not running. I mean, it's like 4 miles an hour in my world. That's not really running. But that was probably a big mistake. And I ended up having all kinds of, basically, I had some kind of really minor prolapse. And every doctor I went to basically told me I was insane and that there was nothing wrong and that this was the new way I was going to be living. And so starting in the middle of February, all the way through really the beginning of May, I was dealing with this feeling like my organs were falling out of me. It's just, and I had a lot of anxiety and depression, and actually it was very uncomfortable as well. It was painful. And so I wasn't able to race in my first race of the season last year, which punched me in the gut and messed with me mentally as well. And then finally, Hawaii 70.3, I was able to go out and very excited about getting out and racing and feeling good enough to race. And I was lucky and thankful to have won my age group there, which, I think I've only done one or two other times. It's a very competitive field there. And so that kind of was the point of being able to turn. But the journey from February to May, I saw 7 different doctors. I went to Mayo. I ended up basically, physician heal thyself. I found my own solutions.
I recognize that we are certainly not medical professionals here, nor do we want to be viewed as one. For the listeners out there, please don't take any of this as medical advice. Beaker's just talking about her experience and what she went through. So, Beaker, from your perspective, if you could rewind the clock and do things differently, would you?
Now that I'm where I'm at right now, coming up on almost a year out from the surgery, there's still days, I'll admit honestly and openly, that I wish I wouldn't had my ovaries removed. I went from pretty normal, everyday, quote, female hormone levels to, no testosterone, no estrogen, no, my recoveries are taking a lot longer. My body hurts in ways that it's never hurt before. I have joint issues that have never been, and all of these things are associated with menopause, especially going into menopause overnight. And if somebody came to me right now with a package, a little bow on it, was like, here's your ovaries. You can have your ovaries back. I'm not going to deny that I might not be like, okay, I'll take them, give them back to me. But I also know, not to get too into the medical side of things, but I had more than one cyst on both ovaries. I had a cyst on one that's a certain type of cyst that grows until it ruptures. And at that point, I absolutely would have had to have surgery, and it would have been an emergency surgery, because that's what happens when they get to the point that they rupture. And, essentially, I was already well into perimenopause. And so when I think about it rationally and not emotionally attached to my organs, I'm like, it was the right decision. And I'm thankful for the people that I've been able to find that helped me with like the hormone replacement therapies and, working with Stacey Sims, who's amazing, with calcium levels and things like that. We've been able to slowly dial things in. And so I guess that's 2 answers to your question. On one level, if I could have my healthy ovaries back, I'd be like, yes, please. And on another level, the rational level, I'm like, no, it was the right decision. And I think what I would have really loved to have been able to tell myself back then, and even tell people now, is that we are all so impatient, including myself, with this idea of, we see this all the time, this person has this major knee surgery and then they go out and they win a gold medal in the Olympics, and I think we all kind of picture ourselves as that person that, well, the doctor said 8 weeks for that guy, but that's not really 8 weeks for me. And I wish I would have just given myself just a little bit more time, maybe, so that I didn't have that prolapse feeling that has kind of haunted me since the procedure.
And I think that's an interesting experience there where, correct me if I'm envisioning this wrong, but for the vast majority of people, the level of activity that you experience on a daily basis is worlds different than what they experience. So the vast majority of people aren't going to have the same experiences as you do. So if they say, oh, it's 8 weeks of taking it easy on the couch, they look at that as a vacation and it's amazing. Like, yep, great. I'm in. Can we make it 10 or 12? I'll take 12. As you mentioned, this is part of you as a person. You do this for your mental health as well as your physical health. So telling you, no, sorry, Beaker, you can't work out for even 6 weeks was really difficult. So the perspective of that, and recognizing that not everybody's experience is going to be the same, but performing at an elite level and being the person you are, understanding your individual needs is different, and it's going to require a different experience overall. People need to understand that as an elite athlete, your experience with surgery and recovery and all of that is going to be different. You might think you're Superwoman, but you might actually need a little bit more recovery. Am I interpreting that correctly from your end?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's important to note that, I made it 10 days and I was allowed to walk on the treadmill. And so I was like, day 10, that was like, I got up that morning and I was like, I'm walking on the treadmill today, to give some perspective here, I think the longest break I've ever had since starting my athletic career back in, 2000, when we're talking 23 years at the point of the surgery, 24 years now. I think the longest I have ever had off and not doing anything was when I had another surgery, right? Like I've had one complete day off since Nice, one day. That's it. And even on that day, we went to the zoo and walked around for 3.5 miles.
You're still walking around. Yeah.
Right. So exactly what you're saying. There's no, laying on the couch all day kind of days.
Yeah. So everybody is different. So please, consult with your
Right.
physicians. Beaker, you went through 7 of them in, I guess, a 2-month window of time. But consult with your physicians. But also, I think it's a strong argument for making sure that your physician has a good understanding of who you are as a person and can be able to interact with that and understand. Oh, they're not just they're athletic. Yeah, lots of people are athletic. You operate at a different level. So working with people that understand you and are on your team and can help you make good decisions for you is an important aspect of this.
I cannot emphasize that enough, Justin. Absolutely. And also I'm very lucky because my gynecologist and my surgeon are both athletes of mine that I coach. My general practitioner is an athlete of mine. And so I definitely have this pot of people that absolutely know who I am. But even still, like you said, it's just really important. You go in and you just tell these people, hey, you need to understand who I am before you do this to me. Right? Because I'm not sure completely if mine totally did. Right.
Well, and that's understandable. Like I said, 90+% of the population does not operate the way you do. So your physicians are going to get a certain mental map of how to treat people, and we need to be able to raise that to them. Say, hey, that I am different. So some people use the derogatory term, oh, they're a snowflake. They're different. Like, no, this is legitimate. You operate differently than most other people do. So when they're giving medical advice, they need to understand that. At least accept it and be able to keep that in the realm of consideration when they're talking about recovery times and all of these things. So again, Beaker, I very much appreciate you sharing some of this stuff, and we could probably talk about this all day. However, we did have some other stuff that we wanted to talk about today. For the listeners in the Money Mile community, if you want to hear more about this stuff, let us know. Beaker mentioned that she might be willing to come back on for another episode and maybe get even deeper into the weeds and all of these things. But for the conversation for today, I was hoping to learn a little bit more about your experience with Nice and kind of what your take was on the change and being able to, rather than the men's and women's combined field in Kona, now women having their own race in Nice, obviously the alternating years and all that stuff. But I was hoping to just get your take on that experience.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about it. I mean, the first thing that I want to throw out is that Ironman sent out a survey. I think it was back in August, maybe the end of July. I'm not sure how many of your listeners may have received it. It's interesting. I haven't been able to find very many people that told me they actually got the survey, or if maybe they don't realize they got it and didn't fill it out. But the survey asked a bunch of questions about the World Championships events and essentially asking 4 key questions. And the first question was, do you want to continue to see the races be held men and women? If you had a choice, would you rank in the order of the men's and women's race being held separately in the same location, being held separately in different locations, no longer being held separately and being held in one location together? And I've been very curious about what the responses were and the fact that I haven't been able to really find anybody else that got the survey. So it's confusing and the curiosity in me, but it made me really think hard and long about what I hope to see Ironman do for the future. And my true hope is that they continue to have the women's and men's races separate. And then I do hope that they find a way to have us back together at the same venue at the same time, because there is something about all of us being together at once and having this, for a lack of a better way of explaining it, the Olympics of our event, and having all of us there and our passion surrounding the sport. But the things that I will say that are really just absolutely noticeable to me, and I own a home in Hawaii. Brenda and I spend a lot of time on the Big Island there together in our home, not me, our home. And the people in Nice, the people in France in general, they are absolutely excited that we are there. You feel like a celebrity there. You wear your Ironman hat into the coffee shop and they get your name. They want to know what your number is. They want to know what your age is, because they even understand that there's going to be waves. They are like, volunteering at this aid station at this time of day and want to know if you're going to be coming by there. And, the next day you come in, they're talking to you like you've been in their shop 500 times. And it's crazy. I mean, I went into a coffee shop twice. The third time I went in, he knew exactly what I was going to order, was excited about the race, and every day asked me a question about the event. And then after the race, this person knew how I did. I mean, I've been racing in Hawaii since 2013. I've been going to the island for the World Championships since 2010. And I'll take my hat off before I go into a business there, because I'm anxious, not about the business owner, but about the people in there that have attitude towards the Ironman athletes. So I think that's one really significant positive of having the venue someplace else. And I think that the people in Nice totally understand the economic impact. I think that they absolutely welcome the tourist in general, and that this event is something they want to see happen in their community again. And, when you're out biking in the middle of the road because there is no shoulder, these people wait behind you with their flashers on, they wave at you when they drive by. I mean, it's Europe in general, I think, has a different attitude towards cyclists and athletes, but I really believe that they were exceptionally welcoming. And so the community side of it makes me want to go back and race. It makes me want to be back in Nice. The race and the venue, I mean, it's just a hard course. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. And that swim was fantastic. I was really a little discouraged by this idea of doing this out and back thing, especially when you came back on the first lap. You could see all the people getting out of the water and you could hear the announcers, and you're like, oh, I got to go do another 1.2 miles. Right. But I thought the water, the swim, everything was really well organized. I'm still pretty anti wave starts, even with the age groups. I think they're dangerous. I think that we got into a lot of traffic in the age groups in front of us. We were the second from last to go. We swam through a lot of people. I think that when they do that rolling start, you never swim through groups of people like that. And so I understand why they still do it at the World Championships, so everybody starts at the same time. But I question the safety of it still. But thankfully, we had a good, safe day. And, we headed out on that bike course, and, I just spent all that time in France riding and getting ready. And then we headed to Kona, and I spent a lot of time riding the bigger hills in Kona, outside of Kona, getting prepared for that race. But I don't know if anything can prepare you for going 6 miles an hour, being 3 hours into your bike ride, looking down and not even being at 50 miles. I mean, I think at that point, I think my soul was crushed. I think I actually might have even shed a tear. I was just kind of like, what else are you going to do? Nobody's coming to get you. It was very cold. We had a lot of wind. And so, just to be in a 17 mile an hour gusting headwind at times, and going 6 miles an hour and looking up and not being able to see the top of the climb. You're just like, I struggled a lot mentally. And I'll also say too, that I don't know how Ironman can fix this, but the course was not closed to traffic. We had a lot of strange things happen to us. We had the Corvette Club decided to go out for the day on our course, and we had 6 or 7 Corvettes come by us, and it's on the descents, which are already kind of scary and fast. And they're doing this stuff on these blind corners where they're pulling in right in between us because they're going around a corner, and then slamming on their brakes because they're going around a corner. I mean, I almost ate the back of a car. The girl next to me that was riding, we were kind of side by side at this point because it was so dangerous. And luckily for me, she spoke English, but I rode up kind of next to her, and I was like, I think we should look bigger, and she got it. And so just in this one little section, and she spoke very fluent French as well, and she just let this guy have it. I mean, pulled up next to him in his car, and I was like, holy cow. I mean, I was going 37 miles an hour. I don't know how fast she was going to be able to accelerate and get up next to this guy. She let this guy have it. I mean, he pulled over. I was like, oh, she was gone. But we also ran into a bike tour. There was 17, 20 people riding e-bikes. I was just like, what is going on here? And the bike course also with the special needs, that was a very strange thing. Special needs was actually not on the course. It was on a very fast descent that went down, and we had to go off the course in a roundabout, come back up to a gravel parking lot. And they had teenagers there. And, I always appreciate volunteers. I truly do. But I don't know if that's the best place for teenagers with a bunch of type A triathletes losing their minds. And there were people like that had laid their bikes down on the ground and were like going through the bags, just chucking bags, women trying to find their bags. And it was really chaotic. I spent almost 7 minutes waiting for my bag. It was a huge mistake. I normally don't use special needs, but I didn't want to carry all my fluids up the climb. I'd look back and think I might as well have.
Versus 7 minutes of standing around.
Right.
It is time for a quick form check. Money Mile is powered by Waller Financial Coaching, a full-time fiduciary financial planning firm. If you want to improve your financial form and improve your financial independence, you can get a copy of Financial Independence for Triathletes by texting Money Mile, one word, to 33777. You will also be added to the Money for the Long Run newsletter. Again, text Money Mile, one word, to 33777. Now let's check in on that running form. If you have your own form cues, please use those. If not, here are mine. Drop your shoulder blades into your back pockets. Bring your eyes up to the horizon and lean forward from the ankles for the rest of this episode of Money Mile. I've heard a couple people comment about, in particular, the descents on that course, in that for most of us as triathletes, we're used to, aero position, long, steady rides. You're competing in Arizona later this year, so the difference of courses there. And concerns were raised, in particular, about the bike handling skills of triathletes. Now, I identify as a triathlete, and I've been on plenty of group rides with cyclists who look at you sideways when you roll up on your TT bike and all that stuff. I get it. But they were raising legitimate concerns about the bike handling skills of triathletes descending at in excess of 50 miles an hour and whether or not that was a safe venue for that. Could you just kind of comment on kind of what your thoughts are and race course design moving forward?
So I will say that I am a descender and I am very comfortable descending. I can descend in aero. I've gone down Lemon almost all in aero. I've in Mount Lemon in Arizona. I've been on that course in Nice as well for the half Ironman World Championships parts of it. Brendan and I have ridden other parts of it. And so it wasn't a completely first time ever seeing this venue for me. But I will say that for those that got there late or those that didn't take the opportunity to get out on the course and do those descents, it is dangerous. And there are a lot of very sketchy sections on that course that are terrifying. I actually came out of a tunnel during the race and hit a wet spot in the tunnel, and you can't see in the tunnel, and my back end slid around, and the girl next to me screamed, not me, the girl behind me, I could hear her scream, she's like, and I'm like not having a conversation in that moment, trying not to die. And there's a lot of like guardrail that's 2 inches tall and drop off to a ravine a couple countries away down there. But I will tell you one thing that I was fairly impressed about with Ironman was they set up these really strange slowing barriers on the really dangerous descents. Like we actually had to, weave through these barriers, and they were like chicanes. Basically, we had to do this little, snake pattern down a couple of these descents that were probably pretty dangerous that I would have just bombed straight down, But I think that it was smart on Ironman's account. And then also they went out and put spray paint down with giant exclamation points. And they had signs in these areas that were like dangerous corner, slow down, which during the 70.3, there was nothing like that. So I think that Ironman really did an amazing job of being responsible and going out and saying, hey, you need to pay attention right here. This is a corner that is very dangerous. You need to slow down, go around. And the other thing is all the road furniture, all the bollards and speed bumps and, reflectors, all these little towns that we ride through, they have all this traffic calming infrastructure. to slow cars down. But when you're flying through there, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour on your bike, right, an arrow, you're going to launch. In fact, I lost one of my bottles on one of them. I was like, well, thank God it didn't go in my wheel. But I think that they did a good job of making sure people understood that stuff was out there. And even in some of the areas that had a lot of that stuff, there were volunteers. So I did see a couple of women on the ground. I think one of them actually ended up on the ground because of a car, one of those pulling in things. But for the most part, I think that they had a really successful bike course. I don't know if we need to do that really psychotically mean climb. I mean, when it takes you over an hour to do a climb and at a venue, it kind of sucks the life out of you. But I also have to say that it's probably one of the most beautiful courses. It's absolutely stunning. The towns that you get to go through are pretty cool. And it's not every day that you get to just like ride down the middle of the road all over France, right, for 112 miles. So
yeah, that is pretty cool. And I'm glad to hear that we've got some good feedback for Ironman as well. I know they have a tendency to be the recipient of a lot of other feedback, let's say. So I'm glad they're learning and they're developing some of that stuff. This is I would still consider this relatively new for them. I think they have their system for Kona pretty well dialed in. This is a relatively new venue, so they're still figuring that stuff out, and they're improving.
I wanted to throw out too, I really thought that run course was great. That run is iconic. That promenade is iconic. The buildings along there are things you see in postcards. The view is amazing. I was like, how many laps do we have to do? But it also meant that we had people everywhere on the course cheering us on the whole day. And I'll say the other thing, they had watermelon at the aid stations, and I have never had watermelon at an aid station. And that watermelon kept me going. I was like, I've never ever done anything like that. And I saw it and I was like, watermelon, it was amazing.
So a little tip out there for other race directors, check into some watermelon if you can. So it's super cool. So I know that you had some differing opinions of your Ironman career, or the longevity of your future career while you were racing. We communicated a little bit about that a little bit earlier. But you've got Ironman Arizona lined up here weeks down the road from here. But before we shift gears to that, I was hoping you could just share a little bit about, we are a finance podcast as well. Could you talk a little bit about the financial component of Triathlon World Championships in Nice versus Kona, and kind of what your experiences were there as far as like difference in travel, accommodations? Obviously, the people were great. Comment to that briefly.
Well, I hate to admit this out loud because, again, we own a home in Hawaii that's a vacation rental, and we would like to see people go to Hawaii and rent. But I think Hawaii needs to take a step back and look at what they're doing to their economy. They have continued to raise their taxes. I mean, I think it's a 17% tourist tax essentially now on accommodations and rental car, and airline tickets trying to get over there have gotten more and more expensive. And truthfully, I think our trip to Nice was cheaper than trying to go to Kona for the Ironman World Championships. We splurged for a little more expensive tickets just so that we weren't in economy and uncomfortable in our seats. But outside of that, you can get pretty affordable tickets to Europe. I mean, it's amazing. Some of our athletes that flew over, I think their tickets were $1,200 round trip, which is astounding to me. And we stayed fairly close to where the race venue was going to happen. And it was like a 7-minute walk for us to get to the swim start, and maybe 5 minutes from the finish. I don't even think our accommodations were $2,500, and we were there for 3 weeks. So yeah, we really did well, and we didn't rent a car. That's the other thing too. When you're in Kona, you kind of need a car if you want to do anything outside of Kona town. But in Nice, it's very, very easy to get around without a vehicle, and you can ride your bike everywhere. It's very easy to get out and about and ride. I mean, I think in the end, a trip to Nice was actually more affordable than a trip to Kona, which is kind of a sad thing to say out loud, right?
Well, and that I recognize there are some challenges with that, and you are in a unique situation. You have a home on Kona that you can go to, but I've heard the comment previously that one person had tallied up all the numbers, and for them to go as a single person to Kona, I believe they were there for 10 days, if I remember the summary, and it cost them $20,000. Flight, transportation, arrangement, food, like the whole shebang cost them $20,000. And obviously, a single person costs $20,000. It's a little bit less expensive if you have more people go because you kind of spread some of those fixed costs around. Like you don't have to rent the house for one person. So you can spread some of those costs around and bring that down. The financial impacts of if you put in all the work and you qualify for Kona, then having to shell, it's not just the race fee. It is what it is. Back in my day, it was like $600 or $700. Now it's different than that. But
yeah, it's 1,800 basically. It's
$1,800
17 with the taxes and everything. Yeah, it's like
yeah.
1,700, $1,800. Yeah.
So beyond that, it just the overall financial impact of it, I would hate to think of someone in a situation where they put in all the work and they qualified and they get to that point and they're like, I just can't afford to go. It's just a bad decision for me and my family to spend the other $18,000 to make that a reality. And if Nice is a more affordable overall structure, I know a lot of triathletes, have plenty of discretionary resources, and that's fine. But some of us don't. And
Right.
when you're looking at that as oh, well, hey, maybe I would rather go to Nice so it's more affordable. It's nice that there are some options. So at least we've got some flexibility with that. In my mind, World Championships may always be Kona. That's always been the ultimate goal in my world, and maybe someday I'll make it. But I like the fact that at least from a financial perspective, there is an alternative. If somebody doesn't feel comfortable shelling out in the ballpark of $20,000 to go race a race, at least they have some alternatives to that. So I don't know, does that make sense to you, or does that sound like crazy talk?
No, I think it absolutely does. And I think that I'm anxious, and I will use the word fearful, that the days of us being able to race in Hawaii are coming to an end. And I wonder if in 2026, the end of 2025, because they're going to have to announce where the next venues are, that they're going to announce that we're moving to, Nice full time as men and women racing together, or, maybe we're going to go to another menu. Maybe they're going to start moving the World Championship race every year like they do the 70.3. And on some level, it makes me really sad and desperate to get back to Kona next year in case it's the last time.
Mm-hmm.
But also as a business owner, I see the reasoning behind it. And I don't know Ironman's finances inside and out, obviously. And I just know from my experiences over the years and the people that I know that work with for Ironman and the things that I read. And so what I say here is not factual, but I do know for sure that Ironman spends a lot of money to have their venue in Hawaii. They do a lot of outreach programs there. They give turkeys at Thanksgiving, hams at Christmas. They do bike programs for kids. They have the amount of money Ironman spends on the Big Island. That's an expense that comes out of their pocket to have their race there, and they pay to go there versus other venues that pay them to have an event. And so as a business, and everybody wants to beat up an Ironman, but I just ask people sometimes to take a step back and recognize that this is an organization that is putting on events so that we can all go out and be rock stars. Without Ironman, I would have never traveled to any of these places that I've gone and raced. I would have never met the community that I've met. And as much as we want to complain about them, about various things, we absolutely need to support them and help them too, so we can continue our sport. I think that it will be a significant shame if the state of Hawaii keeps making it financially hard. And then on top of that, they're not welcoming. It's just, for me, I'd rather spend less money and go to Nice and feel like, a celebrity.
Like a celebrity, yeah. Okay. Well, so I appreciate your perspective on that as well. And I agree with almost everything you said in that. I think Ironman gets a bad rap for a lot of stuff, but they also create a tremendous experience. And there are a lot of other triathlons out there. So if in your life, all you wanted to do was just check the box that you have completed a triathlon, there are lots of ways to do that. If you want an Ironman experience, it is an Ironman experience. And you will pay a little bit more for that. In my opinion, it's worth it, but everybody gets to have their own experience there. So speaking of the financial component, and you mentioned earlier that Brendan's retired, recently retired. So I was hoping you could just share with us a little bit about how retired life is treating, at least Brendan on his side, but you get to be co-pilot for a lot of that stuff. So how is retired life for Brendan treating y'all?
Well, I said this earlier in the podcast, and I just want to throw it out there again that, Justin, we thank you for Brendan being in retirement. If, I was on your podcast, and after we hung up, I was like, hey, by the way, are you available to help us with some financial planning and to prove that my husband can quit his job? And you were like, sure, let's do this. And the process that we went through with you was eye-opening. It was extremely helpful. We're still working with you. And so for any of your listeners out there that have kind of kicked around jumping in with Justin, I say do it, because it's led to us living in a retired state. And for the most part, I would say 99% of Brendan being retired has been super awesome. I mean, he is around all the time now. He's sitting right next to me. But I think my most favorite part of him being retired is, and maybe, I don't know, is that he now gets to drag along on all of my Ironman training. I'm like, we have a 4-hour bike ride today. And he's like, oh my God, we're going swimming today. We've been together, I think, is it 32 years, 34 years? I don't even know. We've been together since 1991. Need to do some quick math. And we are definitely one of those couples that likes to be around each other as much as possible. And so, for me, having him around and biking and swimming and running and of course, cooking me food is my favorite part. It's been fantastic. And we've been able to go and do this dream trip to France. We actually headed over to France and did some of the epic climbs. We followed the Tour de France route backwards this year. We met the Tour de France in Florence for the start of the race, and then followed a couple of stages through Italy, and then kind of went off and did our own thing again. But we just were able to do some really amazing adventures. And yeah, it's been great. I've really loved having him around.
So what would Brendan's take on retirement be? Obviously, he's sitting right there, but so what if he were to share his thoughts on retired life? Not a full year in yet, but is he enjoying it?
I think if Brendan was going to share his thoughts on being retired, I think that maybe one of the first things he might admit to is he should have done it sooner. And then I think the other thing is that he mentioned this to me like a week ago when we were swimming. And his comment was, this is probably one of the best swims I've had, because I don't have to be anywhere. I just get to do this swim, and I get to think about my swim, and I don't have this stress and anxiety of something else that has to be done later in the day with the job, or I only had this chunk of time to get this swim in. And yeah, so I think he's really loving it. We were just talking a couple of days ago about how amazing it is to be here in Arizona. We own a home in Arizona, and we're not in Alaska where it's in the 30s. So I think he's really loving it.
Well, that is good to hear, and thank you very much for the kind words. I certainly appreciate that. I've enjoyed the work that we've done, and I'm glad to see that you're seeing some good results and experience from that. From here, you are lining up for Ironman Arizona, and I know you've had an emotional roller coaster through Nice and working through that, and now you're lined up getting ready for Ironman Arizona. Can you tell me a little bit more about kind of what the plan is from here, and how you're feeling getting ready for the next big race?
Yeah, so the emotional roller coaster that Justin keeps referring to is that by the time I got off the bike in Nice, I have never sat in transition. I mean, I've never just actually stopped moving. And I actually sat in T2 and had to talk myself into going and doing the marathon. I was like, I'm done. I'm not only am I done, I'm retiring. Like that bike ride, stole my love for the sport. And I'd already was behind on my running. And so I knew that we were going to be doing a walk run cycle for this, walking a lot more aid stations than I normally would be. So I basically convinced myself that this was going to be my very last marathon, and that I needed to enjoy it. And that, every mile that was put behind me was the last time I was ever going to run that far. And every single step of that marathon, I was like, I'm retiring. This is it. But, and then I crossed the finish line, and my dear friend Carolyn Olson had a VIP pass, was able to come and see me at the finish. And the first thing I said to her, she's like, the first words out of your mouth were, I'm retiring. And the first thing I did when I saw Brendan was, I think we should cancel our tickets to go to Arizona. I think we should just stay in Nice for another month. I'm not going to do the Arizona. I don't care about Kona. I'm never racing again. And Brendan's response, which was probably the most perfect thing he could ever say, was, you don't get to make any decisions about that today or tomorrow, or maybe even this week. And so I ended up, 4 or 5 days later, I was like, okay, I guess I'll go home to do Arizona. So that's where I find myself now. And I have absolutely had the opportunity to just pull back a little bit and have some time to kind of get back into loving training again and enjoying the aspect of being on a course that's one of my most favorite courses. I really, really love the Ironman Arizona course. They've changed the run. It's now 3 loops, so I'm a little bit anxious about that, but we'll see what happens on race day, having to do that hill 3 times. But it's just crazy. You know, I always say time heals all Ironman wounds, right?
That sounds about right. I know back in the day when you had to sign up for your next Ironman race, like months before you finished the first one, it kind of got you into a cycle like, oh, I'm already signed up for the next one, so I just got to keep going. But now the challenge there is real as you cross the finish line and thinking, oh, I'm already signed up for the next one. Oh my goodness, what did I do? But now the time has healed that wound. You're getting ready to go at it again, and hopefully from a very healthy mental place, not necessarily what you were experiencing at the finish line, the last one.
I am actually feeling really good. I feel very strong right now. I feel really good on my bike. And I am looking forward to Arizona, and I'm hopeful to, repeat my performance here. I've been I don't want to say lucky because there's no luck, but I've been very thankful for my coach, Cliff English, and for Brendan and everything that, all the people that helped me with my success here at Arizona, winning my age group. I think, every time I've raced here since 2017, I've won. So I'm hopeful to repeat that. I'm hopeful to I really do want that opportunity to race in Kona again next year, especially if it's possibly one of the last times we're going to race there. I really, really want to be there for that. And I hate to admit this out loud, but I'm even considering going back to Nice, which, yeah.
Okay,
Something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with me.
Perhaps. I'm not going to rule that one out just yet. But no, I think it's great that you had such a great experience there. You're still considering it, so it didn't completely scare you off the sport entirely. We in the Money Mile community certainly wish you all of the best at your race at Ironman in Arizona. We hope it all goes well, and we'll look forward to following you as you're taking on that challenge as well. So we are going to wrap things up here. I did just also want to mention to the community that we are going to leave links in the show notes to the Peak Fitness Center. Maybe you just tell us a little bit about that again, so everybody's clear about what you do professionally.
I am a coach. I've been coaching for 20 plus years. I think we're going on 24 years now of coaching. I'm one of the top level coaches in the United States on USAT, USA Cycling. We own a metabolic lab, and we do metabolic testing for all different types of athletes, all different skill levels. We work with morbidly obese, traumatic brain injury, as well as the sport that we highlight, which are triathlon, running, and cycling. And yeah, Peak Center, Alaska, and we coach people all over the world.
Wonderful. And I understand that you do have some unique aspects of training with folks who are there in Alaska or who can make it up there, specialty equipment that can help them analyze and understand better how they're doing. But it's wonderful that you also have the capacity to work with folks around the world and work virtually. So thank you for all of that. Again, we'll make sure to have links in the show notes for Peak as well. Thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you.